He laughed in her face. Moments later, a massive private jet worth $80 million touched down on the runway. Richard Dalton was standing in the VIP lounge of the airport, mocking her old coat, her modest bag, and her entire appearance. His new wife was recording everything on her phone, giggling foolishly. But that giggle would die in her throat 10 minutes later, when they saw who had really come to pick her up. That day would become the worst moment of their lives, and the rebirth of hers. Good morning, friends. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and support the video with a like. The private terminal at Van Nuys Airport looked more like a high society club than a waiting room. Ivory leather chairs, polished wooden tables, the delicate aroma of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. It was a place where silence cost a fortune and every sigh sounded like the rustle of money. Sarah Evans sat in a corner by a huge panoramic window, gripping a cup of cappuccino that had already gone cold. She wore a simple navy blue coat bought at a second-hand store 3 years earlier, and her bag was plain fabric, frayed at the corners. In that lounge, where other women wore Chanel and Dior, she felt invisible, like a ghost of her old life. She was 34, but the last 18 months had aged her soul. Yet she wasn't there by accident. Today was the day everything was supposed to change, the day she had survived 687 sleepless nights for. Today she would either take off, or crash completely. Sarah wasn't expecting a commercial flight, not even business class. She was waiting for a private jet. At least, that was what the invitation she received 3 days earlier said. She kept the printed letter in her bag and checked it every half hour, terrified that it might vanish or that the security guards might approach her to say there had been a mistake and that people like her didn't belong there. Her divorce from Richard Dalton hadn't just been a breakup, it had been a public humiliation that dragged through 18 months of hearings. They had met in college. She studied applied mathematics and programming at Stanford University, while he studied business, flashing a dazzling smile and ambitions the size of the Salesforce Tower. Together, they founded Nexotech. The software was built on her unique predictive analysis algorithm. Sarah was the brain, the engineer, the soul of the system. Richard was the face, charming investors, speaking at conferences, giving interviews as if everything had been his brilliant idea. She stayed quiet because she loved him and believed they were a team. Then came Tiffany, a young influencer who made a living photographing her breakfasts in expensive restaurants. Richard decided she was the upgrade he deserved. The divorce was brutal. His lawyers, paid with money from the very company she had built, portrayed Sarah as a bitter employee. They claimed her algorithm was only a minor component and that the real value came from Richard's vision and marketing. In the end, he kept the company, the luxury apartment in Manhattan, the cars, the contacts, and the reputation. Sarah received a modest financial settlement and an insignificant experimental patent she had once filed under her name. Richard's lawyers called it academically interesting but economically useless and let her keep it out of pity, like crumbs falling from the table. Sarah spent her last savings renting a tiny studio in East Los Angeles, a 4th-floor walk-up. The rest went to server rentals and endless nights of programming. She ate instant noodles, drank cheap instant coffee, and wrote code until her eyes burned. It turned out the patent was anything but useless, it was the key. While Richard was destroying Nexotech with flashy but empty projects, Sarah, in her cramped studio, transformed that single patent into something revolutionary. From the ashes she created a new company, Phoenix Analytics. She chose the name one night as she finished her last cup of coffee, feeling she would either fly or burn. 6 months ago, she began secret negotiations with Wolf Corp, a global tech giant led by the legendary Mr. Alexander Wolf. They weren't just interested, they were astonished. Her new platform could solve global logistics problems that had plagued the industry for a decade. The deal was overwhelming, an acquisition that would change her life and make her one of the most influential figures in tech. Today, Wolf Corp was supposed to send a plane for her to fly to Manhattan to sign the final documents. The knot in her stomach was real. She looked at her simple wristwatch, a gift from her dad, who had passed away 2 years before the divorce, and took a sip of warm water. She just needed to wait and board that plane. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm herself, trying to silence Richard's voice in her head, that voice that still whispered she was nothing without him. At that moment, she heard it. Well, look who we have here. Sarah's eyes flew open. Her blood froze. 3 meters away stood Richard Dalton, surrounded by gleaming Louis Vuitton suitcases. He looked as he always did, offensively handsome, wearing a tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He radiated that arrogant and undeserved confidence, his hair perfectly styled, his smile predatory. On his arm hung Tiffany, dressed in a pink Balenciaga tracksuit, her lips inflated to absurdity, her empty gaze drifting around the room. Sarah felt the instinctive urge to hide, to disappear into the upholstery of the chair. Shame crawled up her neck. Richard stepped closer, Tiffany trailing behind him like an overpriced accessory, and stopped in front of Sarah, forcing her to look up at him. "Sarah," he said, stretching out her name in a voice dripping with condescending delight. "I must say, I'm surprised. This lounge is for invited guests only. Didn't you accidentally get lost on your way to the regular terminal?" Tiffany let out a shrill giggle. "Don't be mean, honey. Maybe she cleans here now. It's honest work." Sarah clenched her hands into fists on her knees, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She kept her face neutral, though her heart thrashed like a trapped animal. Richard scoffed with disdain. "Always so quiet, little mouse, aren't you? Look at you, Sarah, same boring clothes. Life clearly hasn't treated you well since I left." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're still living in that miserable studio in East Los Angeles. I saw the pictures. Very cozy." He was provoking her. He had always been a bully who felt powerful only when humiliating others, and she had always been his favorite target. "We," he said, pointing theatrically at himself and Tiffany, "are flying to Aspen. A little gift from our investors. Nexotech just received a massive round of funding. We're on the verge of a major breakthrough. I'm sure you read about it." Sarah had not. The only news she followed was the quiet collapse of Nexotech's stock. Public records showed the company losing money and burning through the trust she had once built. Richard was a salesman, not a creator, and he had sold nothing but smoke. Her contacts told her he was desperately hunting for capital, not celebrating. He was lying, just like always. "And you," he continued, delighted with his own performance, "what brings you here? Meeting a new boyfriend? Someone finally married you? Let me guess, a regional sales manager? Or maybe a dentist?" He laughed loudly, loud enough that the woman in the Chanel suit at the next table looked up. "Seriously, Sarah," he said with false compassion that made her skin crawl. "What are you even doing here? You don't belong in a place like this. Are you waiting for the bus? Wrong building, sweetheart." He and Tiffany laughed together. It was the same laughter that haunted her nightmares, the sound of their shared betrayal. Sarah looked at her hands and noticed the chipped nail polish on her right index finger after another night of programming. She took a slow breath. She had come too far to let him break her. Not here. Not today. She lifted her gaze and met his eyes calmly. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear as a bell. "I'm waiting for a plane, Richard." Richard's eyebrows shot upward. "A plane? What kind of plane? A little propeller plane just your size? You can't even afford a first-class ticket on a commercial flight, let alone a spot from here." "Richard, honey," Tiffany whined, tugging on his sleeve, "stop talking to her. You're going to catch her loser germs on your suit. Let's go drink champagne, baby." "Coming," he said, patting her hand, though his eyes stayed locked on Sarah. He couldn't bear the fact that she wasn't falling apart. "I'm just curious. It's like watching a nature documentary, your ex trying to crawl back into a place she no longer belongs." Sarah stood up. She was 5'5", and Richard towered over her, but rising gave her back a piece of her dignity. She picked up her simple fabric bag, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You should go, Richard. Your champagne is waiting." "Oh, so aggressive," he mocked. "Where was that attitude when we were married?" "Oh, right, now I remember. You didn't have one. You were just a code monkey in the basement. I built that company, Sarah. I made it what it is. And you? You're just a footnote." "A footnote," Sarah repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Exactly. And now, if you'll excuse us," he said, pulling Tiffany by the arm again, "we need to get ready for our flight. Our jet is a beauty, a brand new Cessna Citation Latitude." He began walking away with Tiffany, but stopped to throw one last dagger over his shoulder. "It's really a shame. You had so much potential, but you needed me for it to mean anything. And now look at you." He gestured around the luxurious lounge, a mouse trying to play with lions. "Pathetic. Truly pathetic." He turned and left. His laughter echoed behind him. Sarah sank back into the chair. Her legs trembled. His cruelty was so familiar, so precise, he knew exactly where to strike. For a terrible moment, she believed him. She felt small, insignificant, exactly as he had described her. Richard's words hurled her back into the past. Back to the computer lab at Stanford University, where they first met. She had been a graduate student, buried in complex work on neural networks. He was a business major, charming the whole campus with his charisma and dazzling smile. He approached her not with the awkwardness of her engineering classmates, but with confident, polished interest. "I've heard you're the one who makes all of this work," he said, nodding toward the code covering her screen. He wasn't entirely wrong. Sarah lived in a world of pure logic, a world where code was poetry and algorithms were the language she spoke more fluently than English. Richard, as she later learned, lived in a world of presentations, public relations, and narratives. He didn't understand her work, not really, but he instantly recognized its value. "We're a team, Sarah," he used to say, when his gaze still seemed honest. "You're the engine, I'm the steering wheel. Together we'll go far." And they did. She left her graduate program to co-found Nexotech. Her parents worried, but Richard was so convincing. They married at the civil registry in a small ceremony. The first 2 years were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, cheap pizza, and the thrill of building something from nothing. Sarah coded, Richard presented. Her algorithm, capable of predicting consumer behavior with frightening precision, became their gold mine. They secured funding. Then more. The change in Richard was gradual, and then sudden. The steering wheel began to believe he was the entire machine. He started calling her work our work, and eventually my work. He was the one on stage, the one giving interviews. Sarah, who hated the spotlight, was content working in the shadows as CTO, but in board meetings Richard often cut her off. "Sarah gets lost in the details," he would laugh. "Let me explain the big picture." He convinced her to invest most of their shared assets into Nexotech stock, all under a complex holding structure he controlled. "It's more tax efficient," he reassured her. She, who could calculate quantum models, felt overwhelmed by legal jargon, and trusted him. It was a catastrophic mistake. The patent she kept was a fluke. It referred to a side project, an idea to use her AI to predict logistics flows instead of human behavior. She filed it herself one weekend, paying the small fee with her personal credit card. She told Richard about it, and he dismissed it. "Logistics? How boring. Stick to the money flow, Sarah. Stick to what we know." Then came the first signs of his infidelity, late arrivals he couldn't explain, the scent of someone else's perfume, a sudden obsession with his appearance. When she finally confronted him after finding a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, he didn't even have the decency to be ashamed. He simply walked over her emotions. "Tiffany understands me," he said, as casually as if commenting on the weather. "She understands the pressure I'm under. She supports my vision, and you don't." "I wrote that vision, Richard," Sarah whispered, feeling the ground tilt beneath her feet. "You wrote code," he snapped. The mask of the charming husband fell away. Underneath was a cold, ruthless man. "Code is replaceable. I'm not. You're dragging me down, Sarah. You're a burden." The divorce was his final masterpiece of cruelty. His lawyers, the best money could buy, systematically dismantled every one of her contributions. They presented emails in which Richard supposedly guided her research. In reality, he had only forwarded articles. They pointed to her lack of public presence as proof of her insignificance. They portrayed her as a disappointed employee, not a co-founder. When they reached the useless patent, Richard's attorney literally laughed during the testimony. "Ms. Evans may keep her little academic project. We'll keep the multi-billion-dollar company." Sarah, broken and financially drained by her own attorneys, had no strength left to fight. She signed the papers, walked out of the courthouse, took a taxi to her tiny room, and cried, not silently, but violently. She screamed into her pillow until her throat burned, mourning the loss of her husband, her company, and the work of her life. Only a week later she opened her laptop and saw the file with the patent. Boring, he had called it. She opened it. Her eyes moved over the complex mathematical proofs she had written. A slow, cold anger began to rise, pushing away the pain. He was wrong. It wasn't boring, it was brilliant. And in his limitless arrogance, he had left her the one thing capable of destroying him. He had taken the engine, yes. But she had kept the reactor blueprint. A sharp, professional voice broke through her memories. "Ma'am? Ms. Evans?" Sarah blinked, and the painful memories retreated. A lounge attendant, a young woman with a friendly smile, was standing in front of her. "Excuse me, Ms. Evans, but I have an update regarding your flight." Sarah felt the ground shift again. A delay? A cancellation? Had they changed their mind? Richard, who stood by the coffee machine with a glass raised, turned around and watched the scene with a mocking smile. He was waiting for the final humiliation, the moment someone told the mouse to leave the lounge. "Yes," Sarah exhaled, barely audible. "Your plane has just landed," the attendant said, checking her tablet. "It's taxiing toward the boarding area now. The crew will be ready to welcome you in approximately 15 minutes. Would you like me to bring you a fresh coffee?" Sarah stared at her. It was real. "Yes, ma'am, right on time," the attendant added with a warm smile before walking away. Sarah looked around the lounge. Richard's mocking smile had vanished, now he looked confused. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head. They weren't throwing her out, her plane was real. He exchanged a bewildered look with Tiffany, who only shrugged and kept taking selfies. Sarah turned toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window facing the runway, and her heart didn't just stop, it rebooted. The moment she processed the attendant's words, Richard was already moving. The idea that Sarah might possess something he didn't know about, didn't approve of, and didn't control was an insult to his ego. He left Tiffany at the coffee bar and marched back toward Sarah. His smile was gone, replaced by a tight, suspicious expression. "What is this, Sarah? What have you done? Did you spend your retirement savings on a ticket to who knows where? A charter flight? Are you running away?" Sarah stepped away from the window. The knot of fear in her stomach loosened, replaced by a cold and startling sense of inevitability. The endgame had begun. "I already told you, Richard. I'm waiting for a plane." "Yes, but what plane? You don't have that kind of money." "I know what you have, I know what I left you. That's not even enough for a Costco membership, let alone a private jet." "Richard," Sarah said quietly, firmly, "this has nothing to do with you. Everything you do has to do with me," he hissed, his voice rising. "You're still using my name, oh wait. You went back to Evans. Clever. Wouldn't want to tarnish the Dalton brand." "Richard." Tiffany called, her stiletto heels clicking sharply. "Why are you taking so long? Our pilots are here, they're waiting for us." She showed him her phone with a message, "Citation ready for takeoff." Richard glanced at his watch, then back at Sarah. He couldn't leave before solving the puzzle, before restoring his superiority. His posture told her she was supposed to be impressed. Best in its class. "I'm sure your little plane," he made air quotes, "will be very comfortable. Does it have propellers? Do they give you a tiny bag of peanuts?" He laughed. It was the laugh she hated, the same one he used in the law office, the same one he used in the bedroom when he called her weak. A loud, calculated laugh designed to draw attention and turn her into the centerpiece of an uncomfortable scene. And it worked. Other guests in the lounge, who had politely ignored the couple until now, began to stare. They saw a man in a couture suit and a young woman in Balenciaga laughing at a woman in a simple navy blue coat. The story wrote itself, she was the poor relative, the ex-wife, a charity case. "Look at her, Tiffany," Richard said loudly enough for the whole lounge to hear. "She's blushing. She's embarrassed. It's all right, Sarah, we get it. Well, not here, but you know, when people fall on hard times." He gestured around the lounge. "Maybe I can help. I could offer you a job. Nexotech is growing. We definitely need a junior programmer. Or someone to get coffee. You were always good at that." The room fell silent except for Richard's mocking chuckle. Sarah felt the stares of the other passengers, sharp as blows against her skin. A man in a pinstripe suit shook his head with pity before returning to his newspaper. Sarah burned, but not with shame. It was fury, a clear, cold fury that sharpened her senses. She heard the gentle hum of the ventilation, the faint click of Tiffany's phone recording video, and somewhere outside, the muffled roar of a jet taxiing down the runway. She stood again, spine straight as steel. "You're right about one thing, Richard," she said. Her voice sliced through the silence, and his smile widened. "I do make good coffee." She lifted her untouched cup. "But I'm even better at math, and you were always terrible at it." Richard's face twisted. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you should have read the fine print. You should have paid attention in class. You kept the house, the money, and the company. You took the shell, Richard. But you forgot the one thing that made everything work." She stared directly at him. His laugh died in his throat. He had no idea what she meant, his arrogance had blinded him. He truly believed he was a genius. "You're pathetic," he finally spat, retreating to old insults. "You're delusional. You're probably here on some family pass from a pilot you're dating, and you want to lecture me about my business? You're a joke, Sarah. You were a joke when we were married, and now you're an even bigger one." "Richard, let's go," Tiffany whined, tugging on his sleeve. "You're making a scene and it's not cute." "Oh, it's cute," he said, leaning in so close their faces were inches apart. "You will always be a nobody. You'll stay here waiting for your little propeller plane while I'm in Aspen closing the deal that will make me a multi-millionaire. Remember this moment, the moment you could have been dignified and chose to be this." He turned his back on her in one final act of humiliation. He and Tiffany headed toward the doors leading to the runway, their luggage gliding silently behind them. Sarah simply stood there, watching them walk away. She felt the weight of every gaze in the lounge. In that instant, she looked exactly like he'd said she was. She closed her eyes and counted to 5, focusing on the sound of the approaching jet. It was louder now, much closer. The path from her apartment floor to this VIP lounge had been brutal. After the divorce, Sarah didn't just lose her company, she lost her identity. For weeks she did nothing but dissect her useless patent. Richard's contempt had been his greatest mistake. He saw logistics, trucks, ships, warehouses. Sarah saw a dynamic, complex system of predictive data, a problem far more valuable than guessing which soda brand someone might buy. She created Phoenix Analytics out of nothing. Her office was a used desk in the corner of a cramped studio. Her conference room was a local cafe with free Wi-Fi. She lived on instant noodles and the little money left from the divorce. Every line of code was written with burning, desperate intensity, sleeping in 3-hour intervals. Her dreams were filled with data streams and Richard's mocking face. She worked for an entire year in total isolation. No one knew what she was building. She had learned her lesson. She would never again share her work, or her soul, with someone who saw her as a commodity. When the platform finally stabilized, she didn't seek venture capital. She didn't pitch to arrogant 20-somethings in hoodies. She spent her last few $1,000s on a patent lawyer and protected her intellectual property. Then she wrote the perfect letter. She didn't send it to a random investor, she sent it to the encrypted personal email of Mr. Alexander Wolf, the reclusive and visionary CEO of Wolf Corp. Mr. Wolf was a legend, the man who built a global empire on technologies that actually worked, not on empty promises. He was known as ruthless but fair, and he despised con men like Richard. Sarah didn't expect an answer, it was a last-ditch shot in the dark. The reply came 6 hours later, my office in Manhattan. Tomorrow. Wolf Corp sent a car. She flew economy. She entered a conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline, hands trembling as she clutched her laptop. Mr. Alexander Wolf wasn't a young man, he was over 60, with sharp eyes that seemed to cut straight through her. She didn't give a slideshow presentation, she simply opened her laptop and started the demo. She showed how her AI, Phoenix Analytics, could analyze global delivery routes, weather conditions, supply chains, and political instability in real time, predicting and redirecting flows with 99.8% efficiency. It was a system that could save companies like Wolf Corp billions of dollars. Mr. Alexander Wolf and his team of engineers watched in silence for 2 full hours. They asked questions about architecture, data modeling, and algorithms, not about marketing. It was the most exhilarating conversation of her life. At the end, Mr. Wolf closed the laptop himself. Ms. Evans, he said in a gravelly voice, you haven't just created the best logistics program, you've solved the problem of global freight transportation. What is it that you want? I want to build, she answered, her voice firm though trembling inside. I want this work to live, and I want to make sure Nexotech never profits from a single line of my code. Mr. Wolf nodded with a faint smile. Nexotech. Dalton's company. Don't worry about them, they're a ghost ship. A year ago they tried to secure our main contract. They pitched us exactly the technology you developed, but they had no idea how to make it work. They're irrelevant. Negotiations were fast. Wolf Corp would acquire Phoenix Analytics and appoint Sarah as head of the new Wolf Logistics division. The offer was overwhelming, not just wealth, but generational wealth, power, and security for the rest of her life. And today everything would be signed. The flight to Manhattan was the final step. Sarah returned to the present. Richard and Tiffany were standing by the glass doors talking with their pilots. Their Cessna Citation Latitude was on the tarmac, a beautiful, solid aircraft, no doubt, but parked right beside the machine that had just landed for her. Sarah let her gaze slide past her ex-husband's jet to the aircraft that had just silenced the entire airport. It was magnificent. Not just a plane, a message, a Gulfstream 700, the largest, fastest, longest-range executive jet in the world. Its fuselage glowed with a pearly sheen. The two tail-mounted Rolls-Royce engines looked like the powerful shoulders of a panther, and the Wolf Corp emblem, a stylized star, was painted elegantly on the vertical stabilizer. Next to it, the Citation looked like a children's toy. The main door of the Gulfstream 700 hissed open. A gleaming aluminum staircase unfolded, touching the asphalt with an expensive-sounding whisper. Two impeccably uniformed pilots stepped out, followed by a flight attendant in a sharply tailored gray suit. Richard and Tiffany fell silent, staring at the jet. "Oh my God," Tiffany breathed, her voice echoing across the quiet runway. "Who is that for? It's bigger than the Kardashians." Richard said nothing. His face tightened into a mask of confusion and envy. He knew aircraft, and he knew exactly what that machine meant, $80 million worth of pure, unrestrained power. The preferred transport of billionaires and heads of state. Inside the lounge, the attendant approached Sarah again. "Ms. Evans, your escort has arrived to take you." Sarah turned. Through the entrance, coming from reception, walked a man she recognized, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Wolf's chief aide, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit and carrying a polite yet piercing expression. "Ms. Evans," he said, inclining his head slightly. "A pleasure. Mr. Wolf sends his apologies, he was delayed in Tokyo, but he will meet you directly in Manhattan. We are ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Mr. Bennett." "I'm ready," Sarah said, picking up her simple fabric bag. Mr. Bennett gestured toward the glass doors leading to the runway. "After you." Sarah began to walk. The entire lounge watched her, even the man with the newspaper lowered it entirely to see what would happen. Her path took her directly past the coffee bar where Richard and Tiffany were hurrying back. Their faces were portraits of pure disbelief. Richard grabbed his pilot's arm. "There's been a mistake." "Who is that plane for?" The pilot shrugged. "No mistake, Mr. Dalton. That's Wolf Corp's flagship jet. It's here for Ms. Sarah Evans." Richard shook his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He went pale instantly. Tiffany looked between Richard and Sarah repeatedly. "Sarah Evans? Baby, what is happening? This can't be, she's a nobody." Sarah didn't stop. She passed the coffee bar and the staff who stared toward the door. Mr. Bennett held it open for her. As she stepped through, she found herself only a few steps away from her ex-husband. He trembled, his arrogant facade completely shattered. "Sarah," he stammered in a whisper. "Sarah, what is this? This is a joke. Who are you coming with? What did you do?" She paused briefly, one hand on the door. She looked at him not with anger or pity, but with the cold, distant eyes of a scientist examining a failed experiment. "I told you, Richard. You were always terrible at math. You thought you had the entire equation." "What are you talking about?" he whispered desperately. "You took Nexotech, you took the brand, you took the offices, but the algorithm that made everything work, my algorithm, was protected. Richard, I left a back door, just in case, one you and your overpriced lawyers never found." His eyes widened in growing horror. What? What did you do? I didn't do anything, Sarah said calmly. The code simply expired. The core logic was designed to break down and become useless after 2 years without my maintenance key. That was, let me think, she tapped her chin lightly, about 6 months ago. Exactly when your stock began to drop. Exactly when Wolf Corp withdrew its contract offer, she continued. They don't like investing in ghost ships, using Mr. Alexander Wolf's own words. Understanding hit Richard like a physical blow. It wasn't just that she had succeeded, she was the cause of his collapse. His company wasn't merely in trouble, it was an empty shell, and she held the key. He wasn't flying to Aspen to secure a new funding round, he was standing there with a rented Cessna Citation Latitude, preparing to beg a minor investor for a bridge loan just to make payroll, and he was going to be rejected. He was ruined, and she had caused it. You're a bitch, he breathed, his voice filled with impotent hatred. Tiffany simply stared, mouth open. Sarah didn't dignify the insult with a response. She stepped away and slipped her simple fabric bag over her shoulder. Mr. Bennett, she said calmly, I'd like to leave now. I have a contract to sign. Of course, Ms. Evans. Mr. Bennett guided her toward the door. The fresh air brushed her face, it smelled of jet fuel and freedom. Sarah stepped onto the tarmac. The ground beneath her felt solid, and the soft hum of the Gulfstream 700's auxiliary power unit was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of her future. She walked along the runway with Mr. Bennett at her side. The flight attendant waited at the bottom of the stairs with a warm smile. Welcome aboard, Ms. Evans. We've prepared your preferred tea, Earl Grey, and your briefing for the flight to Manhattan. Thank you, Sarah said firmly. She placed her foot on the first step. Behind her, she heard shouting. Sarah, wait. You can't, you just can't. Richard burst through the lounge doors, running across the runway. His $3,000 shoes skidded on the pavement. Tiffany ran behind him, shouting his name. An FBO security officer was already moving to stop him. Sarah, please, he screamed, voice raw with desperation. We can fix this. We can be partners again. I'll get rid of her. We can have everything back the way it was. I need you. The last 2 words hung in the air. A pathetic, naked confession. He needed her. He always had, he simply never understood it until now. Sarah paused on the stairs, turned, and looked down at the man who had destroyed her life. He was a wreck, his perfect hair was disheveled, his face twisted and frantic. The guard held him by the arm, but he still tried to reach her. She looked at the man she once loved, the man who had called her a footnote, and felt nothing. No, that wasn't entirely true. She felt something, the sensation of true release. The ghost that had haunted her for so long was finally gone. Goodbye, Richard, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried far. It was a final verdict. She turned away from him forever, climbed the remaining steps, and entered the cabin of the Gulfstream 700. Inside was a paradise of cream leather, dark polished wood, and soft indirect lighting. It was silent and peaceful. The flight attendant closed the heavy door, and the latch locked with a deep, reassuring click. The noise of the runway, and Richard's desperate shouting, vanished completely. Sarah sank into a seat that felt like a cloud. The flight attendant offered her a warm towel. We have clearance for takeoff, Ms. Evans. We'll be airborne in about 5 minutes. Sarah nodded and fastened her seatbelt. She looked out the large oval window and saw Richard, now a small, broken figure being escorted back to the lounge, and Tiffany standing by the Citation, hands pressed to her mouth. Then the powerful Rolls-Royce engines of the jet roared to life. The plane began to move, gliding smoothly away from the FBO. It rolled toward the runway, paused briefly, and then, with a thunderous, breathtaking surge, accelerated. Sarah was pressed into her seat as the aircraft lifted from the ground and climbed sharply into the bright, clear sky. She watched as Van Nuys Airport, then the city, and then the entire painful, chaotic chapter of her past grew smaller beneath her until it disappeared into the clouds. She was flying toward Manhattan, toward her future, and finally, she was free. The Gulfstream 700 didn't just ascend, it rose with silent, unstoppable pressure against gravity, transitioning smoothly from Earth to stratosphere with no vibration at all. Sarah felt enveloped by the soft cream leather. It was nothing like the shaking and rattling of a commercial flight. Beneath her, the landscape blurred and then vanished beneath a flawless white blanket of clouds. The unfiltered sun at 40,000 feet filled the cabin with brilliant, perfect light. For the first 10 minutes she didn't move. She simply stared out the window as her pulse slowed. The image of Richard's face, pale, terrified, distorted by his own desperate cries, was etched into her memory. She expected to feel a rush of triumphant joy, a delicious wave of vindictive pleasure. Instead, she felt silence. A deep silence, like when a heavy iron door shuts behind a prisoner leaving a cell he never knew he was trapped in. Ms. Evans. Sarah turned. The flight attendant, Emily, smiled at her. May I offer you something to drink? We have Dom Perignon 2008 on ice, or I can prepare the tea you requested. Sarah looked at her navy blue coat and the simple fabric bag at her feet. The tea would be wonderful. Thank you, Emily. A moment later, Mr. Bennet appeared from the forward cabin holding an elegant leather folder and sat across from her. He was not a man for small talk. Good takeoff, he said in a professional tone, placing the folder on the polished table between them. Mr. Wolfe asked me to brief you during the flight. He thought it best that you arrive fully prepared. Prepared for what, exactly? Sarah asked, accepting the elegant porcelain cup Emily handed her. For the scope of your new role, Mr. Bennet replied, tapping the folder lightly. This is not a simple acquisition, Ms. Evans. It is a full corporate restructuring. Wolf Corp is not only purchasing Phoenix Analytics, we are building our entire global logistics division around it, and around you. He opened the folder. The first page displayed an organizational chart. At the top, in a bold rectangle, sat the name Mr. Alexander Wolfe. Directly beneath it was a brand new box, Wolfe Logistics Division. And inside that box was a single name. Sarah Evans, Director. Sarah held her breath. This wasn't a mid-level managerial job. It wasn't leading a small team. The diagram showed nearly 500 employees across 3 continents, Berlin, Tokyo, and London, who, starting at 9 o'clock the next morning, would report directly to her. Her mind raced. This is far more extensive than I expected. Mr. Wolfe doesn't do anything halfway, Mr. Bennet said, expression impassive. He's not buying your past work, he's investing in your future potential. The financial package you agreed upon is secure, of course, but this, he tapped the folder, this is the real work. He turned the page. It was a budget plan. The figures were so large they looked like typographical errors. The R&D budget alone exceeded the highest valuation Nexotech ever achieved. Your first directive, Mr. Bennet continued, is to integrate your Phoenix Analytics platform into our existing infrastructure. Mr. Wolfe approved a full server modernization. You have complete freedom, you choose the team, the work groups, and the timeline. The system must be fully operational in 6 months. The board will oversee your progress. Sarah leaned back. The warmth of the tea seeped into her cold hands. The brief flicker of fear inside her was replaced by a familiar electric buzz, the feeling she always had when facing an impossible equation, a complex problem demanding a solution. She wasn't afraid, she was hungry. That timeline is too long, she said, her voice sharp and clear. Mr. Bennet raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, 6 months is too long? The code is stable, Sarah explained. The weak point isn't the platform, it's the integration. If I get the budget you've outlined here and full administrative access, I can integrate the main system in 90 days and launch it. We could begin beta testing before the end of the year. But I need a hand-picked red team from your cybersecurity department to try to break it. Mr. Bennet studied her for a long moment in silence. The polite, professional mask dropped briefly, revealing genuine respect. I understand, he said slowly. Mr. Wolfe was right about you, and about the team. And about the team, Sarah continued, flipping through personnel files. These department heads in New York and Tokyo base their logistics expertise on outdated models. They're going to resist change. I need to fly to New York first and then to Tokyo. I need to be with my engineers on site, a video call won't be enough. Mr. Wolfe anticipated that as well, Mr. Bennet replied with a small smile. The Gulfstream 700 is at your disposal, Director. My office will coordinate your schedule. The title hit her with solid, tangible weight. It was real. The rest of the flight passed in a whirlwind of focused work. Emily served a lunch of seared scallops and risotto, which Sarah ate while holding a complex data flow diagram. During that flight, she transformed from ex-wife to executive director. When she finally closed the folder, the sun was setting, painting the sky in fierce stripes of purple and orange. She had completely forgotten about Richard. They landed a little after 10 p.m., local time in New York. The landing was as smooth as the takeoff. When Sarah looked out the window, the city lights glowed across the sprawling expanse of the Manhattan skyline. There was no commercial terminal. The jet taxied to a private, silent hangar where a black Mercedes Maybach S-Class was waiting. Its engine purred softly. "Mr. Wolf is already expecting you at headquarters," Mr. Bennett said as he escorted her from the aircraft steps directly into the back seat of the car. The air was cool and clean. The drive was quiet. Sarah watched the immaculate, modern city pass by. In the seat pocket, a tablet displayed international news. A headline from the Wall Street Journal caught her eye. Nexotech stock in freefall. CEO Dalton faces confidence crisis. She tapped it open. The article was brief and brutal. Trading had been halted after shares plunged 68% in a single day. Rumors pointed to a catastrophic systemic failure combined with the loss of a major potential contract, evidently with the Wolf Corp conglomerate, destroying corporate value. Analysts were again raising long-ignored questions about the company's key technology, widely believed to have been created by former co-founder Sarah Evans, who left the company years earlier. CEO Richard Dalton was unavailable for comment. Sarah closed the tablet. It was done. The equation was balanced. She felt no joy, just a calm, logical finality. Wolf Corp headquarters was a tower of sharp-edged dark glass and steel rising imposingly over the corporate district. The building radiated power. They weren't taken to a reception area but directly to the top floor. The office was enormous, a minimalist stretch of stone and glass overlooking the entire city. Mr. Alexander Wolf rose from a massive, empty desk. He was exactly as she remembered, commanding. He wore a simple black turtleneck and gray slacks, yet he dominated the room completely. "Ms. Evans," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. "Good flight, very productive," Sarah replied, shaking his extended hand. His grip was firm. "Mr. Bennett tells me you believe you can beat our timeline by 3 months. "I know I can," she said. "Good," Mr. Alexander Wolf replied. He gestured toward the table, where a single thick document and a pen rested. "Our lawyers are present, but I find them tedious. I'll summarize. This grants you full control over the Wolf Logistics Division, your compensation as agreed, your budget as outlined, and your authority subordinate only to mine. You will succeed on your own merits or fail. I do not tolerate excuses, nor do I reward failure. However, I reward results. Do we understand each other?" It was a world entirely different from Richard's pompous charm, his stolen achievements, and his empty promises. This was clear, cold, exhilarating. Meritocracy in its purest form. "Perfectly, Mr. Wolf," Sarah said. She took the pen. It was heavy, cool black metal. She found the signature line, Sarah Evans. She signed her name. Her handwriting, once small and precise, now looked strong. The ink flowed dark and bold across the thick paper. "Excellent," Mr. Wolf said. He didn't smile, he simply nodded. "Contract complete. Welcome to Wolf Corp, Director Evans." He pressed the intercom. "Mr. Bennett, take Director Evans to her department. Make sure our tailor visits her tomorrow morning, and clear my schedule for 9. I want to be present at her first meeting." "Yes, sir," Mr. Bennett said, turning to her. "This way, Director." As Sarah followed him out, she paused at the doorway and caught her reflection in the dark glass. She saw a woman in a practical, worn navy coat, hair simply pulled back, face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were different. Sharp. Focused. Completely free of fear. Mr. Wolf spoke one last time without turning around. "Oh, and Director Evans." "Yes, Mr. Wolf? That coat, burn it. You're not a footnote. You're the one writing the book." Sarah nodded. A small, determined smile touched her lips for the first time. "It will be done." She stepped out of the office. The heavy doors closed behind her, not onto a new life, but onto the life she had finally claimed entirely for herself. The work was only beginning. Sarah's story isn't just about the private jet. It's about silence, constant work, hidden pain, and the strength that rises when no one is watching. She proved that success doesn't depend on the noise you make or the attention you demand, but on the foundations you build. The world and its people may try to tell you that you're a footnote. They may laugh at you from their little planes. But the future belongs to those, like Sarah, who have the courage to build their own rooms. What do you think of Sarah's extraordinary comeback? Do you believe in karma, and that true talent and hard work eventually win? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, leave your opinion and support it with a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. See you next time.